Well, thank you very much. Currently, I work in Magdeburg at the university in Magdeburg, as you mentioned, in a project called Industrial ELAB, but I will explain it a bit later on this slide. So probably some of you might think this, oh hell no, please not yet another Markdown interpreter or parser, but this time in Elm. But trust me, I hope this time it will be a bit differently. You know, when I started to work on this project, I shortly realized that there's a huge gap between those who want to create educational content and those who can. It means, I think it takes years probably to become fluent in web development, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, MySQL, Elixir Actor, whatever there is, probably. But it also takes years to become fluent in Chinese poetry, veterinary ophthalmology, or cuneiform writing, you see. But those people are mostly stuck to some kind of PowerPoint, Word, PDFs. And that's why I tried to create a Liascript to help them. So the entire course is available on GitHub. So yeah, you can free for download. I will change the content a bit later, and my presentation will be will be a part of a demonstration and part of a presentation. So I'll mix up these different parts. So, but what is Liascript? Well, it's actually some kind of DSL based on Markdown. Actually, thought to empower those who cannot create, high-quality educational content by their own. So, but probably would be the best if Liascript could introduce itself. So it takes some time.
Hi there. Liascript is not intended to be the next markup language. It is more or less a tool for creating interactive screencasts-like online courses, with an easy-to-read and write syntax. You can use, for example, the double braces notation as bullet points to indicate when something should appear or disappear. You can apply this technique on any kind of markdown block, but inlining is also possible.
And by using double dashes, you can mark a paragraph a comment that should be read out loud.
So, well, I hope you get the point, but if you don't like this kind of presentation, and you can also switch to just something, I want to read those notes probably, or you can change it into like a textbook, like you're used to it from Markdown in this case, or from any other kind of system. So I have to switch this. So, but I would like to start a bit earlier. I was not always a web developer, but I doubt that I'm currently. So actually, I'm from the university. I'm more or less, or was, a robotics developer and embedded systems. So, but I was always fascinated by programming languages and paradigms, so that I even started to create my own programming language. It's called Liascript, and it actually contained everything that I liked about other programming languages or features that I missed. Something like ternary logic or temporal variables, or even spatial temporal reasoning based on SQL. So it sounds awkward probably at the beginning, but it works somehow. So there are a couple of applications available, then there's Demonstrator, the language is running, but the main problem that I had is I couldn't convince anyone. And so when I thought my university career was over, a friend of mine approached me and said, "Hey Andre, you know robotics?" I said, "Yes." "You know embedded systems?" "Yes, sure. You see, I have this project called Industrial ELAB, funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research, and we need a computer scientist. Are you in?" "Oh, of course, why not?" So you see, we need to make all this university hardware, in our case the robots and stuff like this, accessible to students via the internet, so that they can log in every time when they want to and play around, experiment, stuff like this. And I said, "Oh yes." And so, "Is there a problem?" "No, sure." No, there's no problem at all. So you see, so I had no idea. At least I could choose my weapons freely, and it was like, no, PHP again. So I did some little research, and I found this thing called Elixir and Phoenix, and it went quite well. I didn't have any knowledge about web development, but I think in around about 2 months or so, I was able to create a application with a web interface, with a web online editor where students could program robots. At least there was some kind of back end already running, programmed by students. And then I had this problem. every time I changed a bit of the code or I tried to introduce new features, the system somewhere broke. You see, but not in the part where the Elixir could recover it. It was actually at the JavaScript part. So it was quite intimidating because the project was already quite big. So I just was playing around, not documenting it. And so I again did a little research, and I stumbled across this thing called Elm. Just like, okay, what is it? It's a Haskell-like syntax that compiles to JavaScript. It's like static typing, but what actually grabbed my attention the most was this part of this global state, or this one state that you have, and this was somehow genius. So I tried to re-implement the entire system, or the front end, with Elm, and it worked quite well. You see, but so everybody was happy, and me too, but then suddenly I realized what I actually had or developed was kind of some static application. So programming our embedded robots, you could use them to teach, for example, operating systems or navigation or whatever there is. So, but the main problem there was, how do I assign tasks to students? Will I use Word? Do I write HTML pages? And probably you can use something like Markdown, but not in the boring way as it is used today, or not in a static way, but probably, yeah, it would be great to develop those courses externally, host them on GitHub if you want to, so that others can contribute if they want to, add some features, translate it. So yeah, to have some kind of open culture, in course development. So the idea was born to create something like a new Markdown parser, this time entirely based on Elm for online courses. So I start with first thing, okay, there should be already some kind of implementation for parsing Markdown in Elm. Well, yes, there is, but it only uses JavaScript in the backend, so okay, not usable. What kind of parser libraries are there available? Probably. Parser combinators, I've never heard of it. I don't know how to use it. Okay, I'm used to RTLR, for example. I like my scanner, my Alexa, my parser, and all of this stuff. And I know that it compiles to a couple of different languages, so probably also to Elm. No, this time also to only JavaScript. So next step, probably I'm not wanted to implement some kind of a new language, but probably it should be an entire programming language, but probably regular expressions is just enough. So I started to work with regular expressions, and after a couple of hours, I was like, okay, what was this parser combinator thing again? And so it was a bit of an effort, but it worked quite well, even when you're used to the functional programming style, even for Elm in this case. So you start your little project in this case, and the more it grows, the more you separate the functionality in different modules, in my case a different parser, and it grows, grows. But the nice thing is that you can combine these, like the name said, parser combinators, similarly to your views and your update functions. Actually, there's only one tiny parser, a bit of parser necessary to parse quizzes, and this is what it's actually only is doing. And so you can separate all of your models and program it like this way. So yeah, this was great in this case. So, but some of you probably know of this thing called learning management systems. Well, I did some research. These are, from my point of view, they should be called online assessment centers, because that's what it is. And I tried to analyze the usability of how the interfaces, or how you can create courses or educational content with them. So watched a couple of YouTube videos and just counted how long does it take, how many clicks do they need, for example, to accomplish the task of integrating multimedia, how many page changes do they have, and what is the satisfaction rate, probably on some phrases like, oh, it works good, or it works, it's not that easy. So you see, the main problem is, even if you use this LMS, it takes around about 3 minutes to integrate something like a video. It's far too long, and so, separated a lot of some GUI, unnecessary stuff. And what's even more intimidating is something to include quizzes in this case, something like 5 minutes or something, with a hell of more page changes. So, and what I would like to students now to compete with these issues probably. How long does it take in Liascript to integrate something like a video or multimedia content? So we all of everyone who knows Markdown probably knows that. How do you? This is just a YouTube link in this case, so you can give it a name, put it into parentheses. Oh. The main problem is it's loading some kind of JavaScript in the background and it's reloading this every time. Just wait a second. Oh, damn it. So there we are. Yeah, nice. A named video, named link in this case. So how do you add an image? You use an exclamation mark in front of it, but that's it. You're done with Markdown. There are no more capabilities. So my point of view, if you want to include something like audio content, probably, that felt somehow natural to use it in this case. Of course, it won't work in this case, but it's just with a question mark, which resembles an ear, for example. It's like, yeah, from my perspective, the most ideal way to introduce some kind of audio content. And if you combine both approaches, just like image and video, image and audio, it's just like, yeah, you can integrate some kind of audio video file, and you can add some additional attributes just by putting some comment into it, and that's it. That's how you probably add video content in Liascript. How to integrate quizzes so that students can check their knowledge probably. So the easiest way is just like so from my perspective, this somehow resembles, or this is how I actually would draw an single choice quiz with a typewriter. And it actually works out. So you have your stuff, you can make different checks or something like this, and oh sorry, I have no idea, so what's the solution? It's this one click. So you can add as much options as you want to. You can do multiple choice quizzes like which somehow resembled some kind of check buttons, if you want to. But some of you might say, yeah, but these learning management systems, they can answer some hints or add some hints to the quiz when there are some problems. So you can do this the same with just simple, text and markdown notation. And that's actually it. And if you're not used to the explanation or just the result is not enough, for example, you can just simply add something like more detailed explanation just by adding some kind of markdown block with some solution stuff. So see, it works. You can do this for select or text quizzes, and there are even other options, for example, to choose that you can use. This is one thing that I found quite interesting about Elm. So the entire parser is implemented in Elm, so you get the URL of the raw text file. What it does, or at the beginning it was somehow transpiling this into the model, into the entire structure. But this was quite slow. You know, the longer the document gets, the slower this process of parsing was. So then I probably had the idea, I need only to visualize or to parse the only part that I'm showing to the students or users in this case. So you can change the entire structure of your internal model, do some pre-processing, separate into different areas of slides with the title, and then unparsed string. And then if you need it, you just parse this tiny bit. So in this case. So actually it quite worked well. So the uncompiler helped me just a lot. So in this case, most of us would like to do some online programming, or if you're writing a course for hours. And I was always wondering, why is it not possible actually to execute some code if it's some JavaScript code? So it actually should work out of the box. So in my case, I added something like I don't know if you can say it, a script tag. And at import is nothing like a macro that says actually the content of this box, just put it into here, put it into the script tag and then evaluate it. So if you run it, you have your executable code environment, you can program, hello world, you have the output, stuff like this, so you can change the content. Yeah, and basically you have a linear, some kind of version system. So quite simple for students. But in our case, we had this problem. We were teaching C to students with a lot more complex projects. So how do you define probably something like a project with a lot of files in Markdown? So my solution to this was to simply attach those code blocks close to each other, give them a file name, for example, if you want to, and just add a minus if it's open or closed. So the script tag is actually a bit more complex. So that input is like now a function that's integrating or inputting here the content of this file, and input 0 is actually importing the content of this file. And that's quite a nice way. You see your program, it runs on a smartphone or wherever you are. So yeah. But the main problem is not, this part is actually quite ugly, especially if you read your Markdown document afterwards on GitHub or something. So I introduced this concept of macros, and this is nothing else like a simple text substitution system. So every macro is defined within a main header. It's just an HTML comment at the front of every course. And it starts with an add. So this is a one-line macro, and this can be a more complex. You can parameterize them. So to define more complex functionality in this case. So you see, where is it? Yeah, just add lead this template in this case. Or if you have more complex functionality like programming like real C, if you want to, it takes a bit of time, because in this case I use the Rex Tester API, which requires a hell of a lot more complex requests in this case, with a lot more JavaScript and Ajax into it. But that's probably only one part for a programmer, from a programmer's perspective. If you are some kind of medicine professor or teacher, for example, so you can define also other kinds of macros, or use them or reuse them, like in this case. It might take some time, but it's doing nothing else like loading some kind of medical data set. So, and if you're giving a lecture or talk, where is it? It disappeared. Yeah, but I think you get the idea. I don't know what it does not work anymore. So actually some basic VDK video. So, I mean, I can give a lecture on that. Just give these teachers this functionality, and they can just try it, present it, and all the students probably on their tablet can repeat this, filter some kind of skulls or some cancer in this. And then there was something quite interesting I didn't expect at the beginning with those macros, for example. So the basic idea was that you simply copy and paste this functionality into your Markdown document to reuse it. But then I suddenly realized, wouldn't it be better to have a kind of import mechanism for self-explaining Markdown courses in this case? So I just somehow discovered this on accident. So I simply defined an additional import tag. You give it the name of your whatever course it is, or the direct URL, and it just needed the entire functionality for grabbing this Markdown document, parsing it, and it was already there. So it took something around about 11 lines of glue code, and this functionality was accessible. Just on, I guess I'm done. Yeah, so what's next? You see, from my perspective, what's better than 50 professors and 50 universities giving more or less, 50 times the same lecture it's probably better if they could cooperate in producing one kind of course online quite easily, because whenever you search for it, so the most disgusting thing is actually you only have to search for skyrocketing in this case. For example, it always has to do with education. So the education is textbooks, online courses, university degrees. It's getting more and more expensive. But the problem is, or the question is why? Probably if we could transfer this open source idea into open course idea where everyone can contribute, some could contribute content and some could contribute functionality in this case. So to ease the first implementation step, I added 2 Atom plugins, just a preview and just a snippet to get some basic help. But it's quite hard to convince people to use it. So there are 2 other projects like Lia templates, where you simply can, there's a set of self-explaining courses where I added some functionality like VDK, Rex Tester, whatever system you can use it. And then another one is just I started is like Lia books, programming books from Wikipedia probably, accessible or not accessible, I mean executable in this case. And I would love to see something like to access Ellie in this case. You see, to make this book on Elm probably also interactive. Okay, thank you very much.
Does anybody has questions?
I can just laugh, but you showed that it's possible to execute JavaScript code and C code from within the local interpreter. Very, very cool. I'm wondering, are you able to do the same thing?
At the moment, not. I tried it. I tried to get in contact with the Ellie developer, but I didn't get response so far. I would like to do something, to make it possible.
Could an Elm in Elm compiler help to do that?
Sorry?
Could an Elm in Elm compiler
I guess it would be great. Absolutely great, see? So because there's so many nice projects. I mean, there's a Lisp implemented in JavaScript. There's a C++ interpreter implemented in JavaScript, so you don't need some system in the back end. So like with Rex Tester, and this is just a service someone is offering, like programming in 40 different programming languages. So JavaScript is always easier.